I'm about to show you something that is going to completely transform how you think about your cholesterol medication, your most recent cardiology visit, and a fruit that has been sitting in grocery stores your entire life, yet no one ever told you it was capable of doing what most prescription drugs cannot. There is a clinical trial so unsettling to the pharmaceutical model that it has remained buried in cardiovascular research journals for over 2 decades, while the standard of care continued prescribing statins as usual. Even more important, there are 5 specific biological mechanisms active inside your arterial walls right now that your physician has never measured, never evaluated, and very likely never even mentioned. And there is one crucial truth about this fruit that nearly every senior misunderstands, a mistake serious enough to turn something protective into something harmful for the heart. By the end of this video, you will understand why one specific fruit is the only natural substance ever demonstrated in a clinical trial to physically reduce existing plaque inside human arteries, why its 5 mechanisms target the root cause of cardiovascular disease at a level statins simply cannot reach, and why the way most seniors consume this fruit may actually be damaging the very arteries they are trying to safeguard. Stay with me because this story begins with a man named Gerald, and the conversation he had with his cardiologist on a Tuesday afternoon in March is exactly why you need to watch until the end. Before I reveal the fruit, you need to understand there is a correct way and an incorrect way to consume it. The incorrect way is how most seniors approach it, and that approach can create the same cardiovascular damage the proper method is designed to prevent. By the end of this video, you will clearly see the difference because the distinction is subtle and no one is standing in the grocery aisle explaining it to you. Gerald was 71 years old and lived in Phoenix, Arizona. His wife Carol had watched him take his statin pill every single evening for 9 years with the steady discipline of a man who treated medication compliance with the same seriousness he once gave to his military service. She refilled the prescription 2 weeks before it ran out. He never skipped a dose. A small ceramic dish sat on the kitchen counter beside the sink, and every evening after dinner, the pill waited for him in that dish, and every evening he took it. Gerald had been on a statin for 9 years. His LDL cholesterol was 98, comfortably within the range his cardiologist described as excellent, and his total cholesterol was 172. At every appointment, his doctor reassured him that his numbers were controlled, that the medication was effective, and that he was doing everything right. For 9 years, Gerald believed that. He walked each morning, took his pill each evening, and monitored his diet with the careful attention of a man who understood that his heart was the engine keeping him alive. By every measurable standard, he had followed the rules perfectly. That Tuesday afternoon in March was meant to be routine. Gerald drove himself, parked in the same spot he always chose, and checked in with the same receptionist whose name he had known for 6 years. He sat in the waiting room for 11 minutes, reading a paperback, completely at ease. There was no reason not to be. His numbers were excellent. His cardiologist studied the imaging on the screen with the composed, professional expression Gerald had come to recognize over 9 years. But this time, the pause before speaking lasted just a little longer than usual. Not dramatically longer, but noticeably so. The discussion that followed was not what Gerald expected after nearly a decade of strong lab results. His plaque had increased, not drastically, not to the point of immediate intervention, but measurably and undeniably. Year after year, his carotid intima media thickness had continued to rise. The wall of his carotid artery, the primary vessel delivering blood to his brain, was thicker than it had been 5 years earlier, thicker than it had been 2 years earlier, progressing quietly and consistently in a body whose cholesterol levels had remained in the excellent range for almost a decade. Gerald asked one question, the way someone asks when he already senses the answer will be uncomfortable. If my numbers are that good, why is the plaque still growing? His cardiologist paused, not because he lacked an answer, but because he was deciding how to deliver it. He replied, because lowering the number is not the same as stopping the process.
Gerald let that settle in. 9 years. A pill every evening. Carol refilling prescriptions early, the walks, the disciplined diet, the reassuring numbers labeled excellent at every appointment. And yet the plaque had continued to grow, slowly and steadily, inside a body described as managed. He then asked, "So what actually stops the process?" His cardiologist responded, "That is the right question." And then he added something Gerald would later repeat to Carol word for word in the parking lot. "The honest truth is, I was trained to manage the number. Most of what I know about stopping the process, I had to research on my own." Gerald drove home and told Carol exactly what had been said. She stood quietly for a moment, then lifted the ceramic dish from the center of the counter, the one that had held his statin pill every evening for 9 years, and moved it to the side. She did not throw it away, she simply repositioned it. She said, maybe it doesn't need to sit in the center anymore. She did not yet know what would take its place. That answer comes later, and that is what this video is truly about. Now, there is something critical about cholesterol that many doctors never fully explain, and I need you to hold on to this because it changes how you interpret everything that follows. LDL cholesterol itself does not directly cause heart attacks. Oxidized LDL is what drives the damage. Think of regular LDL like iron. Iron is essential, structural, and necessary in the body, but when iron oxidizes, it changes character and begins contributing to deterioration. LDL behaves the same way. When it becomes oxidized, it transforms into something far more harmful, setting into motion the chain of events that leads to cardiovascular injury. Now picture what happens when iron becomes wet and remains exposed to air. It corrodes. Rust is chemically related to iron, but it is weakened, fragile, reactive, and destructive to whatever it touches. Oxidized LDL functions in much the same way. When a free radical, a highly reactive oxygen molecule circulating in your bloodstream, collides with a normal LDL particle and chemically modifies it, that LDL shifts from stable iron to biological corrosion. And corroded cholesterol does not simply glide past artery walls the way unaltered LDL can. It embeds itself. Gerald's LDL measured 98, technically excellent, but no one had evaluated how much of that LDL had been oxidized. No one had checked for the corrosion. There is a laboratory test that measures oxidized LDL directly, known as the OX-LDL test. It requires a standard blood draw, takes several days for results, and costs roughly the same as a routine lipid panel. Most cardiologists are able to order it, many insurance plans cover it, yet the majority of patients have never had it performed because it is not included in the conventional cardiovascular panel. The standard workup evaluates total LDL, HDL, triglycerides, and their ratios. It does not measure the corrosion. Gerald had completed 11 lipid panels over 9 years, but he had never once had an oxidized LDL test. And here is what no one explained to him during those 9 years. Statins reduce the total amount of iron, but they do not prevent iron from turning into rust. The oxidation process continues regardless of how low the overall cholesterol number falls. A senior can maintain an LDL of 90 and still carry a significantly elevated proportion of oxidized LDL. The statin lowered the iron, but the percentage of corrosion increased. The plaque continued to accumulate. So what initiates the corrosion in the first place? What generates the free radicals that transform LDL into its oxidized form? 3 primary drivers are responsible. Persistent arterial inflammation, the kind fueled by metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, and decades of processed foods dominating the modern Western diet. Exposure to cigarette smoke, whether current or in the past, since combustion produces enormous free radical loads that linger in vascular tissue long after smoking stops, and oxidative stress associated with aging itself, the gradual weakening of the body's internal antioxidant enzyme systems that often begins in the mid-50s and intensifies with each passing decade. All 3 existed in Gerald's physiology. None were directly addressed by the statin. So what interrupts that cascade? We're getting there. But first, you need to understand what unfolds inside the artery wall once oxidized cholesterol takes hold, because what the immune system does next forms the foundation of every heart attack, and it is one of the most unsettling processes in cardiovascular biology. When oxidized LDL slips beneath the lining of the artery, the immune system identifies it as a threat. It dispatches specialized white blood cells called macrophages to engulf and eliminate the damaged cholesterol. The macrophage arrives, consumes the oxidized LDL, and initially performs exactly as designed. This distinction matters. The macrophage is not the villain. It is a defender placed in an impossible position. The immune response itself is appropriate. The issue is not the cleanup crew. It is the relentless influx of corroded cholesterol. As long as oxidation continues converting healthy LDL into oxidized LDL, macrophages keep arriving, keep ingesting, and ultimately keep perishing. The response mirrors the magnitude of the threat. When that threat persists for years or decades, as occurs with chronic arterial inflammation, the immune response shifts from protective to destructive. The damaged cholesterol keeps entering the artery wall. The macrophages keep consuming it. They consume and consume until they become overloaded with oxidized fat, swollen beyond function. They cannot exit. They remain trapped within the vessel wall, engorged, toxic, and deteriorating. At this stage, researchers give them a fitting name: foam cells. Imagine a maintenance crew sent to remove debris, consuming so much of it that they collapse in the hallway and become the obstruction themselves. Then additional crews arrive to clear the fallen workers, overconsume, and collapse as well. More arrive, more fall, and the passageway fills. That buildup becomes the necrotic core, not an outside invader, not a foreign substance, but your own immune cells, deployed for protection, destroyed by the material they were meant to eliminate, layering within the vessel wall that should be transporting blood efficiently to your heart and brain. The very cells sent to repair the damage become the damage. As millions of foam cells accumulate, die, and stack upon one another, they create a structure known as the necrotic core, dense, toxic, expanding, and sealed beneath a thin fibrous cap. The fragile barrier separating that hazardous core from your circulating blood. That structure is the plaque responsible for heart attacks. Not simply a cholesterol reading, but a mass of foam cells formed because cholesterol became oxidized. Gerald's LDL remained at 98, yet his plaque continued progressing because oxidized cholesterol was still embedding in his artery walls, still activating immune responses, and still generating new foam cells while his statin maintained an impressively controlled total number. Now the question becomes unavoidable. Can foam cells be reduced? Can plaque actually shrink? The answer to that question is the most critical point in this entire discussion. And I'm going to ask you to stay with me a little longer, because before you can grasp how reversal happens, you need to understand one more essential piece.
To truly understand how plaque progresses and becomes life-threatening, you need to recognize two additional breakdowns occurring inside your body right now. Failures that intensify the foam cell problem far more than most people realize. The first involves the very marker your doctor has reassured you about for years, HDL, commonly called your good cholesterol. You have been told HDL is protective because it transports cholesterol away from the arteries and back to the liver. That explanation is accurate, but incomplete. What you likely have never been told is why HDL can perform that function and why in many adults over 65, it gradually loses its effectiveness. HDL does not operate alone. Attached to its surface is a microscopic enzyme known as paraoxidase 1, often abbreviated as PON1 or simply P1. Think of P1 as a biological sharpshooter. Its mission is to circulate through the bloodstream, identify oxidized LDL, the corroded cholesterol, and neutralize before it embeds itself into the artery wall and ignites the foam cell cascade. P1 is the true protective force. HDL is merely the vehicle carrying it. As we age, P1 activity steadily declines. The sharpshooter goes quiet. HDL may still circulate in the bloodstream and appear as a reassuring number on your lab report, but without active P1, it becomes largely ineffective.
like a security guard present for the shift but asleep at the desk while oxidized LDL slips past unchecked. Gerald's HDL was 52. His physician described that as healthy. What was never measured, however, was his P1 activity. The sharpshooter had likely been inactive for years. The patrol car was visible, but the guard inside was not alert. There's a specific way to reactivate that enzyme. I will show you shortly, but first you need to understand the daily cost of leaving it dormant. Every hour P1 remains suppressed, oxidized LDL continues circulating freely. Every hour, some portion of that damaged cholesterol penetrates artery walls, activates macrophages, forms new foam cells, and expands the necrotic core. Not dramatically, quietly. The same quiet progression Gerald experienced for 9 years while his HDL value looked perfectly acceptable on paper. Because standard testing confirms HDL exists, it does not confirm whether it is functioning properly. Study after study examining P1 activity shows a consistent pattern. Measurable decline often begins after age 50, and by age 70, many individuals demonstrate substantially reduced P1 function compared to their younger baseline. The guard is not just tired, he has been asleep for decades, while oxidized LDL has continued moving past him uninterrupted. And yes, there is something specific that can wake that guard back up. I will explain that in a moment. Before we get there, there is a third breakdown occurring within your arteries, and this one carries immediate consequences. It determines whether plaque remains silent or becomes catastrophic. Plaque itself does not end lives by merely existing. It becomes lethal when it ruptures. Stable plaque, protected by a thick and intact fibrous cap, can remain in an artery for decades without triggering an event. The cap contains the toxic necrotic core. Blood continues flowing around it. Life continues normally. This is what physicians hope for when imaging shows stable plaque. However, inside that plaque, a group of enzymes works continuously against that stability. They are called matrix metalloproteinases, abbreviated as MMPs. You can think of them as microscopic scissors. Under normal circumstances, their role is healthy tissue remodeling, trimming and rebuilding collagen to maintain vessel integrity. But in an inflamed arterial environment, MMP activity escalates. They begin cutting into the collagen of the fibrous cap, thinning it, weakening it, continuing to slice until the cap becomes dangerously fragile, sometimes no thicker than paper, leaving the toxic necrotic core one blood pressure spike away from rupture.
When rupture occurs, the contents of the necrotic core spill into the bloodstream. The body reacts instantly by forming a clot over the exposed material. Within seconds, a vessel that was partially narrowed can become completely blocked. That is how a heart attack or stroke unfolds. A person may appear stable the night before, numbers controlled, labs reassuring, and yet not survive the next morning. The MMP scissors can be active long before anyone detects them because MMP activity is not measured on standard blood panels. What makes this mechanism especially alarming is its timing. Inflammatory signaling molecules often peak during the early morning hours, typically between 4 and 6 a.m., precisely when physiological stress hormones surge and blood pressure rises. During this window, the fibrous cap may be at its most vulnerable. The enzymes are active. The cap is being chemically weakened. Blood viscosity increases slightly during sleep. A person goes to bed with stable plaque and wakes up, or does not, depending on what occurred during those early hours. Reducing excessive MMP activity is not a marginal benefit. It is the difference between plaque that remains contained and plaque that becomes fatal. There is a natural compound shown to modulate these enzymatic scissors, and it is the same compound that supports P1 activity, interrupts the foam cell cascade, and has demonstrated measurable vascular effects in clinical research. But before I reveal it, there is one more mechanism you need to understand, because this final piece is the most unexpected part of the entire discussion.
Once you see it clearly, you will understand why the way many seniors consume this fruit is not simply ineffective, it may actually be counterproductive. Your body already produces the precise molecule responsible for relaxing and opening your arteries. It is called nitric oxide. The endothelial cells lining your blood vessels manufacture it continuously through an enzyme known as eNOS, endothelial nitric oxide synthase. Endothelial nitric oxide synthase, eNOS, is the production plant. Think of eNOS as operating continuously, 24 hours a day, generating the signal that instructs your arteries to remain open, flexible, and protected. When nitric oxide reaches the smooth muscle layer of the vessel, it delivers a single command: relax, widen, allow blood to pass freely. Every blood pressure medication on the market attempts, through chemistry, to imitate what nitric oxide accomplishes naturally. In a young and healthy body, nitric oxide is produced, survives long enough to reach the smooth muscle, and the artery dilates as intended. In an older body experiencing oxidative stress, a very different sequence unfolds. A reactive molecule known as the superoxide radical, present in elevated levels in any system with arterial inflammation, intercepts nitric oxide almost immediately after it is formed. Within milliseconds, the two molecules combine and create a compound called peroxynitrite. The nitric oxide is neutralized before it can deliver its message. The artery never receives the instruction to relax. Peroxynitrite is not simply an inactive byproduct, it is damaging in its own right. It injures the endothelial lining and impairs the very eNOS enzyme responsible for producing nitric oxide in the first place. This creates a destructive cycle. Superoxide eliminates nitric oxide, peroxynitrite damages the production system, reduced nitric oxide production leaves even less defense against superoxide, and the process accelerates. The artery's built-in protective system weakens progressively as oxidative stress intensifies. Your body is attempting to send a signal, but the messenger is being destroyed before it arrives. The smooth muscle remains constricted. The artery remains stiff. Blood pressure trends upward. At the same time, the glycocalyx, the delicate gel-like protective coating along the endothelial surface, depends on nitric oxide signaling to maintain its integrity. When nitric oxide availability declines, the glycocalyx deteriorates as well. The vessel becomes rigid and vulnerable simultaneously. There is a clinical term for this chronic destruction of nitric oxide signaling: endothelial dysfunction. It is widely recognized as the earliest measurable stage of cardiovascular disease, appearing before visible plaque, before consistent hypertension readings, and often long before symptoms emerge. The endothelium deteriorates quietly. Nitric oxide messages are intercepted repeatedly, and the artery stiffens year after year. Blood pressure medications can force smooth muscle relaxation through pharmacological pathways, but they do not eliminate the superoxide radicals responsible for destroying nitric oxide in the first place. They work around the issue rather than resolving it. The oxidative process continues, nitric oxide continues to be intercepted, and the medication temporarily overrides the tension. When the drug effect fades, the artery returns to its previous state because the underlying imbalance remains uncorrected.
So what protects nitric oxide long enough for it to function? What neutralizes superoxide before it intercepts the signal? That explanation sheds light on the remarkable blood pressure findings observed in the group consuming pomegranate. The significant systolic reduction was not achieved by directly forcing arterial relaxation, but by reducing the oxidative radicals that were interfering with nitric oxide. The body restored its own signaling pathway, and the artery responded as it was designed to do. The fruit responsible is the pomegranate. Here is what is rarely discussed in routine clinical conversations. Pomegranate contains unique polyphenols called punicle agents, found in concentrations unmatched elsewhere in the plant world. These compounds circulate in the bloodstream and act in multiple coordinated ways.
First, they serve as a protective shield for nitric oxide, neutralizing superoxide radicals and extending nitric oxide's functional lifespan from fleeting milliseconds, too short to reach smooth muscle, to several seconds, long enough for the relaxation signal to be delivered. But nitric oxide protection is only one part of the picture. The earlier mechanisms inside the artery are also addressed. Foam cells, the engorged macrophages, overloaded with oxidized cholesterol that accumulate within the plaque's necrotic core, are not fixed permanently in that state. Punicle agents stimulate a process known as cholesterol efflux. In simple terms, foam cells are prompted to release the oxidized cholesterol they contain, transferring it back into circulation where it can ultimately be processed by the liver. As this occurs, the necrotic core can begin to reduce in density, and plaque may decrease from within under appropriate conditions. Regarding the PON1 enzyme carried by HDL, the protective factor that declines with age, clinical investigations involving pomegranate extract have demonstrated measurable increases in P1 activity. As P1 function improves, HDL regains its effectiveness in neutralizing oxidized LDL before it embeds in the arterial wall. The protective patrol becomes active again. For the matrix metalloproteinases, the enzymatic scissors that thin the fibrous cap, polyphenols in pomegranate have been shown in laboratory settings to modulate MMP activity, reducing excessive collagen breakdown. With less enzymatic thinning, the fibrous cap can maintain greater structural integrity, lowering vulnerability to rupture. And finally, the nitric oxide support mechanism restores a signal the artery has been attempting to send for years. Multiple pathways addressed simultaneously within a single fruit. Up to this point, we have discussed biological mechanisms. The next step is examining the clinical research itself, human participants, measurable vascular changes, and documented outcomes. Investigations led by researchers such as Michael Aviram at Rambam Medical Center explored these effects under controlled conditions, measuring real cardiovascular markers in real patients.
Real patients, real arteries, real imaging, and outcomes that to date have not been reproduced by any pharmaceutical compound in a comparable clinical setting within cardiology. Before we look closely at the Aviram data, it is important to understand why those findings stand out in the broader landscape of cardiovascular research. In modern cardiology, interventions generally fall into two categories. The first category focuses on slowing progression: statins, antihypertensive medications, and structured lifestyle modification. These approaches aim to reduce the speed at which plaque accumulates. What they are not designed to do is eliminate plaque that already exists. Within the current standard of care, no widely adopted pharmaceutical therapy has consistently demonstrated regression of established atherosclerotic plaque in humans under rigorous clinical trial conditions. The prevailing objective in conventional cardiovascular medicine is stabilization and deceleration, not reversal. In many clinical discussions, reversal is viewed as improbable. The Aviram study reported regression. Under the direction of Michael Aviram at Rambam Medical Center, patients with significant carotid artery stenosis, substantial plaque buildup in the arteries supplying blood to the brain, were given daily pomegranate supplementation for 1 year. These were not mildly affected individuals. They had documented arterial narrowing, measurable by imaging. The control group, which did not receive pomegranate, experienced approximately 9% progression in carotid intima media thickness over 12 months, consistent with expected disease advancement. Their arterial walls continued thickening. In contrast, the group consuming pomegranate did not merely slow progression. Imaging demonstrated measurable reduction in carotid intima media thickness, with reported decreases reaching up to 30% over the same 12-month period. The arteries of participants with established stenosis were clearer at the end of the study than at the beginning. In addition, average systolic blood pressure decreased by approximately 21 points, without medication adjustments being the primary driver. In a field where the benchmark expectation is slowing deterioration, regression represents a fundamentally different outcome. For someone like Gerald, who had managed laboratory numbers for years without halting plaque progression, this category of result had never been presented as an option.
The reported figures were striking: measurable plaque reduction and a notable average systolic blood pressure decline within 1 year. For context, these changes were observed alongside the biological mechanisms we discussed earlier: effects on oxidized LDL dynamics, enzymatic activity, nitric oxide preservation, and inflammatory modulation. However, before assuming that any form of pomegranate will reproduce these findings, there is a crucial distinction to understand, one that separates individuals who attempt this approach without results from those who replicate the conditions of the research. The preparation used in the Avirum trial was not a standard commercial juice product. It included compounds derived from the whole fruit, including components often reduced or altered during industrial processing for taste and shelf stability. Many retail pomegranate juices are filtered, pasteurized, and formulated for palatability. Processing methods can significantly affect polyphenol concentration and activity. This distinction is not trivial. It directly influences the presence and stability of puniculalogens and related compounds. To illustrate why this matters, consider Barbara's experience. Barbara was 68 and lived in Sacramento, California. After learning about potential cardiovascular benefits of pomegranate, she purchased several bottles of commercially available pomegranate juice and began drinking 8 ounces each morning. She believed she was supporting her heart health. She mentioned it to her physician, who did not object. At her follow-up imaging appointment 6 months later, her carotid intima media thickness had not improved. Her fasting blood glucose had increased, and mild insulin resistance was noted, changes that had not been present previously. Neither she nor her physician initially connected these findings to the juice. Pomegranate has a healthy reputation. What Barbara had been consuming daily, however, was a sweetened, pasteurized beverage containing natural sugars, including fructose. Without careful attention to formulation and polyphenol preservation, such products may not deliver the same bioactive profile used in controlled trials. Excessive sugar intake, regardless of source, can influence metabolic markers in susceptible individuals. When Barbara later learned about differences in preparation methods and the impact of processing on polyphenol stability, she realized that not all pomegranate products are equivalent. The details matter. Formulation matters. Dosage and composition matter. Understanding those distinctions is essential before attempting to replicate any clinical outcome.
When Barbara's follow-up imaging showed no measurable improvement, she described her reaction to her daughter as a mixture of relief and anger. Relief, because there was finally an explanation for why nothing had changed. Anger, because she had spent 4 months purchasing 3 bottles of juice per week, believing she was investing in her heart, when in reality she had been buying a sweet beverage dressed in pomegranate-colored branding. The morning after she understood the difference, she transitioned to a whole fruit preparation. Her next imaging appointment is scheduled 4 months from now. Pause here, because before you add this fruit to your shopping list, before you walk into a store assuming you know what to buy, there is something critical most seniors are never told. It is the difference between supporting your arteries and unintentionally undermining them, and the distinction revolves around the part of the fruit that nearly everyone throws away. Here is the misunderstanding. If you purchase a standard bottle of commercially produced pomegranate juice, the bright red, sweet liquid in the refrigerated section, you are not replicating the conditions of the Avirum research. You are not meaningfully accessing concentrated puniculalogens. You are not activating protective enzymatic pathways in the same way. Most retail juices are pasteurized, heated to extend shelf life, and filtered for flavor. Processing alters polyphenol stability and often reduces the concentration of the bitter compounds found in the whole fruit. What remains is a sweet beverage containing naturally occurring sugars, including fructose. Fructose itself is not inherently harmful in modest amounts within whole foods, but concentrated liquid forms can affect blood glucose and insulin response, particularly in individuals with insulin resistance or metabolic vulnerability. When consumed daily in significant quantities, even fruit-derived sugars can contribute to oxidative stress and metabolic strain in susceptible people. A product may appear medicinal because of its branding or reputation, yet its biochemical profile depends entirely on how it was processed.
Now consider how most people eat a pomegranate. The fruit is cut open, the white inner membrane, the pith, is removed because it is bitter and fibrous, the outer peel is discarded, the sweet red arils are eaten. From a culinary perspective, that makes sense. From a phytochemical perspective, however, it changes everything. Research consistently shows that the highest concentration of punologens and related polyphenols resides in the peel and inner pith, not primarily in the sweet juice sacs. The parts most commonly discarded contain much of the bioactive compound density studied in laboratory and clinical settings. The sweet arils contain beneficial nutrients as well, but they also contain natural sugars. The bitter components that many people avoid are rich in polyphenols associated with antioxidant and vascular supportive activity. Understanding that distribution helps explain why whole fruit preparations differ from filtered juice products. There is another biological dimension that makes this discussion even more nuanced, and it involves the gut microbiome. One of the primary polyphenols in pomegranate metabolism is ellagic acid. On its own, ellagic acid has limited direct absorption in human cells. Its transformation depends heavily on specific gut bacteria. Certain microbial species convert ellagic acid into a metabolite called urolithin A. Urolithin A has attracted significant research interest because it enters circulation and has been studied for its role in supporting mitochondrial function through a process known as mitophagy, the cellular recycling of damaged mitochondria. In cardiac and endothelial cells, efficient mitochondrial turnover is associated with reduced oxidative stress and improved cellular resilience. The fruit supplies the precursor. The microbiome performs the conversion. Without appropriate microbial composition, ellagic acid may pass through the digestive system with minimal transformation. In that scenario, urolithin A production is limited. Research published in journals such as the European Journal of Nutrition has reported that urolithin production varies widely between individuals. In some cohorts, only a portion of participants produced measurable levels after consuming ellagic acid-rich foods. Microbiome diversity, antibiotic history, dietary fiber intake, and overall gut health all influence this variability. This helps explain why two seniors can consume the same fruit and experience different outcomes. The determining factor may not be the fruit alone, but the microbial environment responsible for converting its compounds into active metabolites. If the microbiome lacks the bacteria required for efficient urolithin production, the most potent downstream effects associated with mitophagy may not occur. That does not mean pomegranate lacks value. It means the system is interconnected. The raw ingredient and the biological machinery that processes it must both be considered. A gut ecosystem that cannot efficiently convert ellagic acid limits the metabolic potential of the fruit. Supporting microbiome health through dietary fiber diversity, fermented foods, and reduced inflammatory load becomes part of the broader strategy rather than an afterthought.
Urolithin A, derived from ellagic acid, is also dependent on gut function, and a gut that cannot carry out this conversion is usually struggling with dozens of other metabolic pathways that directly influence cardiovascular health. Repairing the microbiome is not a separate mission from repairing the arteries. They are part of the same biological system. The structured framework outlined alongside this material focuses on the precise prebiotic and probiotic support required to encourage urolithin A conversion, and that is a discussion worth having at your next medical appointment. Now, here is how to realistically pursue results similar to those reported in the Aviram research. There are two primary approaches. The first is a whole fruit preparation. Purchase a fresh pomegranate, remove the seeds, but do not discard the white inner pith. Keep a generous portion, 1 or 2 tablespoons of that bitter, spongy white material, and place it into a blender along with the seeds and 8 ounces of water. Blend everything together thoroughly. Do not strain it. Drink it as is.
The flavor will be bitter, astringent, earthy, more medicinal than refreshing. That bitterness reflects the punicalagins. That sharp edge is the active compound profile. If the taste is smooth and sweet, much of the therapeutic polyphenol content has likely been removed. The second approach offers more consistent clinical precision, a standardized whole fruit pomegranate extract in encapsulated form, not juice, standardized to contain at least 40% ellagic acid and punicalagins. In this preparation, the peel, pith, and seeds are processed together and concentrated. 0 grams of sugar, no fructose surge, no insulin spike, no added stress to the glycocalyx. Because it is standardized, each capsule delivers a consistent polyphenol concentration, something that a fresh fruit, influenced by ripeness and variety, cannot reliably provide. Before beginning any supplementation, consult your physician, especially if you are taking blood-thinning medications, as pomegranate exhibits mild antiplatelet properties that may interact with certain regimens. Continue all prescribed medications exactly as directed. Nothing here is intended as a reason to alter, reduce, or discontinue any medication without medical supervision. Before outlining the protocol, understand this. You have heard 5 mechanisms and 1 clinical trial. That is the science. Science by itself has never reversed plaque in a single individual. Gerald did not change his outcome by merely understanding the Aviram data. He changed it by implementing a precise protocol in a defined sequence with intentional sourcing decisions that translated research into consistent daily practice. The gap between knowing that punicalagins help clear foam cells and consistently delivering clinically meaningful concentrations into your bloodstream without triggering a fructose spike is not minor. It is the entire distinction between reading about a result and reproducing it.
The educational framework provided alongside this discussion translates science into application. It outlines whole fruit blending ratios aligned with Aviram's dosing model, extract standardization criteria that differentiate evidence-based formulations from marketing claims, prebiotic strategies to support urolithin A conversion in aging microbiomes, and specific laboratory assessments, oxidized LDL, carotid intima media thickness, RBC magnesium, PON1 activity that reveal arterial reality beyond the standard lipid panel. It also provides guidance on how to frame conversations with your cardiologist so that years spent managing numbers can evolve into discussions about modifying the underlying process. This is not a supplement shortcut. It is preparation for a better clinical conversation, the kind that begins when a physician turns from an imaging screen and asks what changed. Here is what you can begin today. Examine the label on any pomegranate product you currently use. If it is juice, a sweetened blend, or heat processed, reconsider it. Fructose does not support arterial repair. If you consume fresh pomegranate, retain the pith, blend it whole, and do not discard it. If you choose the extract route, look specifically for a standardized whole fruit extract containing at least 40% punicalagins, consistent with the Aviram methodology. Non-standardized supplements are not equivalent. Support your microbiome deliberately. Urolithin A conversion depends on robust gut bacteria. Fermented foods, kimchi, kefir, plain yogurt, sauerkraut, consumed daily create the foundation. Without the manufacturing facility, your gut, the raw polyphenols cannot be fully utilized. At your next appointment, ask your cardiologist specifically about oxidized LDL, not total LDL, not ratios, but the oxidized fraction. Inquire about carotid intima media thickness imaging if it has not been performed. The Aviram trial used CIMT as a primary endpoint because it demonstrates whether plaque burden is shifting direction. It is not part of a routine panel. It must be requested directly. Consider sharing this information with someone who's been told their cholesterol numbers are controlled, yet still feels uncertain. Lipid values can appear optimal while oxidative processes continue. HDL may look reassuring while paraoxinase activity has quietly declined.
Plaque can seem stable, while metalloproteinases gradually weaken the fibrous cap beneath the surface. The imaging or testing that could clarify the situation may never be ordered simply because no one requested it by name. 6 months after Carol moved the ceramic bowl from the kitchen counter, something else replaced it. Gerald returned to his cardiologist half a year after implementing changes, not with improved cholesterol numbers, which were already strong, but with imaging, a carotid intima media thickness measurement that had never been ordered in 9 years of visits. Carol drove him. She waited in the reception area with the same paperback he had left behind months earlier, still unread. When Gerald walked back into the parking lot, Carol looked at his expression before he spoke. After 43 years of marriage, she could distinguish neutrality from significance. He told her the measurement, the number, and more importantly, the direction it had shifted. She responded, "So it worked." He answered, "Something is working." His cardiologist had remained silent for several moments while reviewing the imaging before turning around. He said he wanted to understand precisely what Gerald had changed, not to discourage it, but because he was thinking of 3 other patients who might benefit from the same conversation. What Gerald adjusted, in what order, at what dosages, and with which microbiome support strategy formed the backbone of his approach, not as a replacement for physician oversight, but as preparation for it. His cardiologist is now considering others, and your physician deserves the opportunity to have that same informed, focused discussion.